As you're aware, the annual report's required by Board Resolution 499-90. And internal audit unit currently consists of a supervisor, 3 full-time auditors, and 4 part-time auditors. Our responsibilities in FY13, we looked at management coordination, external audits, financial and compliance audits and reporting, operational audits, assistance to managers and staff, and investigations. The annual external audit is performed by our external auditors, Clifton Larson Allen. FY13 is the first year of a second 2-year contract with an option to renew for 1 more additional 2-year contract. With the state audits, our primary auditors are from MSDE, MPSCP, the construction people, and the Office of Legislative Audits. The first report of OLA was published in January 2009, and they've been directed by the legislature to look at schools every 6 years. So if they aren't here sometime this year and they're on their 6-year schedule, they would show up here sometime in 2014. With our financial and compliance audits, we do a lot of our work with the independent activity funds. We audit the CIF annually, and we provide input to the combined annual financial report, the CAFR. As of June 30, 2013, the IEFs combined had an approximate total of $16.3 million. We looked at 77 schools in FY13. After we review a school, we have a discussion with the principal and his or her financial agents. Then we will issue a written report, and the principal has 30 days to respond in writing to our report.
Something says that if an audit reveals egregious or numerous repeat findings, the respective associate superintendent is invited to attend. How often does the associate superintendent actually attend?
We might have had 2 or 3 over the last year, but
I mean, did you have ones where you said this is egregious and you're invited and they didn't show up, or I'm just curious?
They always show up, or they will send a representative from OSSI to be there. We had one recently where Don Press, former Chief Performance Officer, sat in on it.
What would, not naming schools, of course, what would be an example of egregious?
Probably if, let's say, purchase of gift cards for staff is prohibited, and we found that the principal was, buying gift cards and giving them to staff as rewards. They can show staff appreciation, but they cannot do it with gift cards. Maybe some sort of procurement that didn't go through proper channels that should not have been purchased to begin with, could be something egregious. But generally, it's multiple repeat findings in the same area that weren't corrected is when we would invite an associate superintendent. Of the 39 secondary schools, there were 4 high schools this last year that had disbursement transactions in excess of $1 million. Some of the findings that go across the board were disbursements in which the principal did not get prior approval before the procurement was made. That doesn't mean that the procurement wasn't for the benefit of the student body, it's just that the principal needs to make that approval in advance, otherwise he or she could lose control of how much money is being spent. Field trips, we look to see that at the conclusion of the trip, a comprehensive report is filed, and sponsors sometimes fail to do that, but we would need to know all the students eligible to attend, not just those who went, in order to make sure that we account for all the students, all the money that should come in. Sometimes a teacher might forget and leave money in her desk, and by making sure they get a comprehensive report, they find, well, you know, we know that 10 more kids went. You want to check your desk and, you know, bring it down. Cash receipts sometimes is an example. You know, teachers aren't bringing the money to the class or to the financial agent right away, and the financial agent might not be going to the bank right away. That might not be a problem in itself, but it increases the odds of something getting lost or stolen. With procurement cards, the finding is that the logs were not maintained, meaning that with a procurement card, the purchases, it's generally like about a 45 delay from the time somebody makes a purchase with a charge card and it shows up on the statement that the principal received. So in order to get a more accurate picture of how much money they have available, they need to be getting these logs from the people making the purchases with their receipts and say, you know, here's what it is. A principal is supposed to forward his or her log to the associate superintendent so that they review it, because everybody needs to have somebody, you know, with oversight. And occasionally a principal does not send in their log to the associate superintendent.
And then what happens?
That will become a finding, and we need to get that corrected, and the associate superintendent pay more attention to that particular school. But again, we're not saying that the procurement was wrong. It's just that somebody needs to be keeping track. Everybody needs to check on each other, because mistakes can get made. Every once in a while, somebody might use their school purchase card to accidentally make a personal purchase, and that's reported immediately to the controller, and that's taken care of. And you know, sometimes that happens, but it's fixed right away. So if everybody's, you know, checking, watching the logs, that's going to show up more quickly.
Well, if there are no logs, well, I'm just curious in terms of when you do your audit. I mean, if you can't find logs, do you go through the actual statements from American Express just to verify that everything is legitimate?
Right. There are monthly statements that American Express produces system-wide that we can access. And before we even go out and do an audit, we know who's got the cards, did they make any purchases, and then we look to see, you know, show us the documentation. So if it's not there, we'll know it should be there. With bank statement reconciliation, sometimes principals aren't reviewing them in a timely manner. We give them until the 20th of each month to review the bank reconciliation from the prior month. Now with our new software, School Funds Online, I can pull up a report for all of MCPS, and I made a note to myself, every 21st of the month, I'm going to pull up that report and see what schools have not reconciled. Then I'm keeping a spreadsheet and annotating which schools were tardy. So we already have something to discuss if there's more than a few times that the principal missed that before we go out there. And I'm also trying to think through other ways I can use the new software to do some system-wide checking. With fundraising, sometimes sponsors weren't preparing the required completion reports. And if they're not doing a completion report, they really don't know, did they make a profit or did they have a loss? We've had occasionally, say a yearbook, where a sponsor thought he or she made a few $1,000s profit when in fact they actually lost money in the process. With online sales that some schools are doing now, sometimes the financial agent forgets to get from the vendor the online sales report to, you know, put this all together, and we, you know, just keep reminding people what they need to do. With sponsor activity reports, every month when there's activity in an account, every account at a school in the IAF has a person's name after it. Sometimes it's the principal for certain, like the general account. But fundraising, field trips, they all have a teacher's name after them. And whenever there's activity in that account, the financial agent is supposed to send an account activity report to that sponsor where they look to see, did all the money I collected end up in my account? Did anything that came out of it, did I authorize that to be spent or transferred to some other account? It's primarily to catch mistakes, but if you had someone who was, cooking the books, that would also catch, we don't say we don't trust people, it's just that we need to take care of each other to make sure that I didn't make a mistake because I posted some money to somebody else's account, and this monthly process is supposed to catch that. And the last thing is admission receipts. Sometimes those aren't accounted for according to board regulation, the way it's supposed to work. Occasionally we'll find that a school might use the same ticket but charge multiple prices for adult, for student, for senior. And if you're charging different amounts and using the same ticket, it's impossible to determine whether or not you got the right amount of money that came into the school. So we remind anybody who might not be doing that properly. With the
Okay. Do you look at things like parking lots in terms of the student pay for parking spots and all that? I mean, where does that money go? I mean, is that something that gets reviewed?
Yes, every year schools order how many parking passes that they want, the hang tags, through OSSI. Then the financial agent comes, picks them up, signs for them. At the end of the year, a new process has been started where all of the remaining hang tags are sent into Nikki Diamond and Debbie Camp, who work for Mr. Bowers. They collect all of those, and once they have all of those, they will have them shipped up to internal audit, and we will do a system-wide review to make sure that any leftover tags are all accounted for in the documentation that they send us. And then we will check to make sure that the money was deposited into the student parking. There's a specific account in the IF at high schools where they deposit that parking money into, and we'll verify to make sure that that's all being done. We're in the process of doing that right now for last year's parking.
So that money goes into the IAF funds?
That is correct.
Parking lot.
That's correct. And there's
It's
a,
accounted for into the athletics account. So those dollars are used towards supporting interscholastic sports and athletics. So it's a source of funding for that program.
Does not stay in-house at the local school.
It does stay in-house, but
It goes into that account.
the formula then is adjusted based on the revenue that they receive.
Dr. Beatty, who works for Mr. Bowers, has some process and spreadsheet where they look at that and they, equitably allocate funds then for the following school year based on the parking revenue that came in the prior year.
I thought parking revenue funded middle school programs, no?
No, what funds middle school programs are the activity fee. The student activity fee. So when the board restored the program, part of the restoration was the creation of, actually at the time I think we increased the student activity fee to restore it. So. And again, so schools that have more parking, get higher fee, don't benefit necessarily from it. So it goes into a big pot, and it gets redistributed in more formats.
How about things like just athletic events? I mean, a school that has, always sells out their games, do they just get more money, or how does that?
Probably,
Is there any way to
we can come back and maybe put that on a future agenda if the board's interested. It certainly does create differences between schools.
I mean, that's why I asked that. I know the next presentation is where we look at the actual amounts in these accounts, and
We can
I was
actually
just
now
thinking
report
what-
on that, since every school is using the same football gate receipts account in the new software, and we have the ability to report across the system.
We already have an annual financial report for interscholastic schools, and so you go school by school, and you can see great gate receipts, boosters, clubs, contributions, and you can see all the sources of revenue. And we've tried to balance that out a little bit with the allocations, but it's difficult. But again, if the board, if the
So-
committee is interested, we could come back and.
I would be very interested in having an understanding of how that works.
It's good.
it's almost like related to CNA discussion.
Exactly, exactly.
Raise that more when we talk, when we look at those
Right.
accounts. Also, in terms of vending machines, does that money stay at the school, or does that money just go?
The vending, the commission that the schools get stays with the school. It's passed through food services. Most of our schools have gone with ACH, electronic fund transfer, so their commissions are going directly into the bank account from Royal Dining. High schools and middle schools get their commissions every month. Elementary schools get theirs every quarter.
I do want that to be on record, because there are still some principals who say that all the money goes to Larry Summers. That is not true. They just,
Let
they
me.
just don't get as much as they used to in the good old days when those machines were on
all the time.
and-
They're not getting their signing bonuses like they used to.
So things are a little bit different, but, so the amount that schools get is significantly below what they do get the commissions.
So let me just understand. So X high school has vending machines in a variety of locations. Those vending machines will only be on at particular times during the day. That's important.
For certain products.
For certain products, right? And they're only on, and so one, that whoever we're contracted with to provide the vending machine is then based on the revenue that's generated from that machine or those machines, whichever way it may be, commission goes to that individual school. On a middle school and high school basis, you're saying that commission is monthly, right? So X high school or X middle school every month sees X amount of revenue or commission from the vendor based on sales, right?
Well, certain products have different percentages that they pay.
Okay.
So it's not X percent over the total sales.
So let's say you have a whatever product and it has 6% over, another product has 12 or 15, and I don't know these numbers and would love to understand them. So they're getting that commission on a monthly basis, right? So you've got a Pepsi machine, you sold 1,000 sodas or whatever in whatever time period, you're getting whatever percentage over, right? And that comes to the school. That's accounted for, right? Those funds are in the IAF, right? And there is an account in the IAF that, is it by the machine or is it just the total
It's total for the school.
for the school?
But the schools do get a report that will show machine by machine how
What
the
they're,
funds
how they're doing,
generated.
right?
And sometimes the school might decide to relocate a machine from one area to another based on, is it having any sales or not?
Right.
And as board members know, if they're selling soda, they're not on during the day. And
30 minutes after.
Right.
30 minutes afterwards, they're being turned on, so it's
Right.
late afternoon, evening, or weekends that the products.
So in many ways, it's either our folks who are in the extracurriculars that are happening after school, or the folks that are using the building via ICV that are producing that revenue. And I'm kind of separating that out. I'm not really dealing with the issue of, what's our policy relative to when the machines are on. I'm just trying to understand, because there was this, I just recollect years ago being in a meeting where I thought that the revenue from these machines was coming to central office. So did I miss that at some point? And
Again, those were just the principals who were trying to convince board members that I was stealing their money.
I wasn't a
There's no
board
truth-
member at the time.
there's
I
no
just
truth to
remember
that.
I was just
Before my
a,
time.
Blair was
Right,
in the
right.
lead.
Huh?
Blair was leading the charge.
and I'm sure I was probably attending some of those meetings. But I just
Mr.
wanted
Bowers was seen in a Brinks truck.
traveling through the county, right? So just let me understand. So then, what role other than the auditing and ensuring that the financial reporting process is accurate and clear do we have at central office to the process that schools go through in receiving the funds from these vending machines?
I'm not sure if this gets to answer your question, but we have twice gone directly to Royale, showed up there about 4:30 in the morning, and gone on a route with one of their vendors and just watched the process and verified how they're doing it. They got something called a DEX machine that they just plug into the machine, and it automatically tells them how much they should get by product. So it's, I would think, impossible for a driver to, withdraw money and not account for it.
Right.
And then we went back, at the end of the day, when they go through the counting, and each of these trucks has a safe, that a drop safe that the vendor, puts the money, zips it up in a bag, drops in that safe, and it's not opened until somebody from administration at the facility, back at the warehouse, opens up that safe,
Got it.
and then they count it on.
So that is, to me, that is just ensuring that the accounting for the vending machine is accurate and appropriate. What I'm really asking, what I'm getting to, is back to this question of central office has no control over or doesn't get any percentage of funds that go to so I put in 75 cents to buy a soda, and based on the deal that has been brokered with the high school or middle school, 50 cents is gonna go to the vendor for their 15-cent soda. That's what
It's
they
not
pay for.
negotiated school by school,
That's fine.
it's just
Contract by
wide,
contract.
and the director of food services oversees that contract and monitors it.
Okay, that helps me understand that portion of it, but I'm still getting to, I've put in 75 cents, and let's say the contract defined by whoever, signed and agreed upon by whoever, says 50 cents of it goes to the vendor, and the other 25% or 25 cents goes to at school, right? That 25 cents, that school gets that full 25 cents. That school is not then responsible for giving any of that 25 cents to central office or some percentage thereof.
That's correct.
So there's no role that central office has financially, not reporting wise, just in terms of actually getting revenue from vending machines in our individual schools.
Central office gets none of the money that's generated at school from vending.
In central office, then, but we do define what those funds can be used for and not be used for.
Well, the general IF rules apply.
Okay.
principal wants to use that to pay for AP fees for students who can't afford AP testing. That's what,
That's their choice.
that's their choice.
Right. Principal's discretion.
So it's basically whatever
As long
fits
as it
within.
complies with rules and regulations and MCPS.
So you trying to say you've been getting a bad rap, man?
But it's nothing new.
With our
So-
operational,
So with these items, I guess, and my guess is if you looked at last year's report, probably all these things would be the same from year to year
fairly
of these
consistent.
findings. And I guess the question is, why do we keep on saying, is it training? Is it principals not take this seriously, that they have to comply with the rules? Is there a lack of oversight? I mean, what exactly, I mean, these things come up again and again and again, and it seems like, you know, I'm not sure, you know, like you said, egregious might be the same finding for a principal, and the principal comes back and says, this is how I'm gonna fix it, and then the next year you might see the same finding again.
Personnel
I think
turnover is a
I think
factor.
part of the issue we look at is though that it's not just the principal. So on most of these items, they're related to teachers and other people who are responsible. So going through field trips and sponsor activities and fundraising, and so it's not just looking at the principal, it's actually training all the staff in the school about what their responsibilities are. And quite honest, well, at an elementary level, it may be a little bit more difficult, because you don't have a school business administrator, you don't have a financial specialist, you have the principal and the secretary who are trying to oversee all of these activities and follow all the guidelines. So part of our challenge is in working with not only the leadership of the school, but figuring out how we can do a better job of trying to help in the training of all the staff in the school. And that's a big job. And I think we've done a great job of training the principals, assistant principals, and the financial specialists. I think the next step is trying to go down further and to train the sponsors, teachers who are managing all the field trips, and maybe giving them some better tools through the new financial package that will help.
But
also.
one thing is trying to get teachers out of the role of being cashiers through the movement to online stores where parents can pay for the third grade field trip. We're also talking with training staff about webinars. So I've got a field trip, what do I need to know? I'm doing a fundraiser, what do I need to know?
So I think that's the next level of work, is to communicate that to them, provide them some training and some more knowledge. And then it'll make the principal's job a little bit easier to implement this. Because having the principal having to train all their staff is being challenging just with everything else they have to do. So we need to partner with the principals to help it be better.
Start off these things saying the principal is the one that has the fiduciary responsibility for these funds, so.
And how do you give them the tools to make it do that?
And I think if you look over the years, I think we're definitely getting better. We're not there yet. And I think it's, as we've set very, very high standards and have high expectations. So, and I think we are getting better. It's just, there's still opportunities for improvement.
So, just on that point, because I think this came up, we've been doing this for several years. The issue, and I want to go back to the responsibility of the principal, is the supervisor in charge, if you will. The audits that happen and the conversation that goes on and the report that goes back and forth with that principal, as you said, if there's an egregious infraction, that it may be that we include then the associate superintendent in the conversation with the principal. I guess the question becomes, for those who may find themselves lacking in their ability to provide the financial oversight with or to provide financial oversight, what work is done with the associate superintendent to ensure, one, that the principal does get the training and does take the training seriously that's been provided. I mean, Mr. Graba and her team have done a tremendous amount of work on the financial manual. We've done a lot on the training, right? So we put a lot of stuff together. And then there's the issue of, do you comply, as in, do you attend? Do you ensure that you have mastery of the material, just like we expect of our students? And then there's the whole issue of, do you use the information we provided you with, right? And in other places in the workplace, if you don't do that repeatedly, it shows up somewhere in your evaluation. And I know that we don't have, well, Mr. Lowndes is here, so maybe you can speak to this, but, you know, where does it show up for a principal if they, in fact, repeatedly can't seem to get that part of their responsibility together? And how does this work out? I know, I don't know that you're here to deal specifically with that question, so I'm gonna give you a little room on that, but I know that I've asked this question before.
And we had this conversation, and so the principal has to put together, working with the associate, an action plan for how they're going to improve it. And it does become part of standard 3 in the evaluation in terms of the management of a school. So there's a variety of responsibilities principals have, not just financial, but this is certainly an important one. And so it certainly is something that will become, should become part of the evaluation. There are repeated problems with financial management and oversight in school.
High school principals have, you know, like you said, we saw, 4 schools with $1 million worth of transactions? That's a significant amount of money. And as a parent, that's a significant amount of our money. We're writing big checks, especially if you have a high school senior, you know, and you feel like you're repeatedly writing checks to do all of these things, which you want to have your child have a great experience, you know, as they go through. So it's not like there are things that I'm going to complain about, but definitely a real concern to know that those funds are being managed properly or accounted for properly. So I just think that there is still some, I think we have to connect this dot, which is we have you, Roger, and your team working on evaluating or auditing. Are they going through the right processes? Are they doing it so that we can account for the funds appropriately? Then there's this other side of the responsibility of the principal, which is, as the supervisor, you understand you're not the one counting the dollars and having to do it, but does your staff understand what the process is? In some ways, you know, crap rolls downhill, and if the principal is getting heat because teacher X, Y, and Z are not accounting for and doing what they're supposed to, like you say here, the sponsors aren't, there's no sponsor for a particular activity, which means there's no person whose name should be accountable, right? How do we deal with it coming down to that individual understanding, this is what I was supposed to do? If I sponsored the X club and X club went on a field trip and we collected X dollars, this is what I was supposed to do. Because I do feel like we get to the principal at a certain level, but then how do we account for, well, maybe the principal has some people in the building that aren't doing what they need to be doing. And how do we deal with that? And that's not yours to handle, but it's definitely yours to discover. right?
A lot of times, staff turns over in the school, the financial agent turns over, principals turn over, so everybody could be learning. And you might have a different teacher being a sponsor for the same activity the next year versus the one who used to do it.
Right,
So
let me
it's a constant-
stop you. I got you, but I'm gonna push, because earlier this morning, the Baldridge team met, and I wasn't able to attend that meeting, but one of the things that we pride ourselves on is that we document these processes, right? So it shouldn't matter who takes over. I understand that they have to learn it, and there's a learning curve, but I'm raising this because we have seen, if we look at the IAFs, sometimes we see the same schools with similar issues repeated.
That's what I'm concerned about, is the repeat.
Right. And so there's something that we've either got to do at our level at central office, or somebody's got to put some serious heat on these principals to say, It's one thing. It's understandable that every year things are not going to be perfect. You're going to strive for that. But if you're having the same problem repeatedly, you can't go to the excuse that, well, this year was Miss X because she was the sponsor. Last year was Mr. Y because he was the sponsor, because the common denominator in all this is you're the same damn principal. Excuse my language. This isn't directed at you, my frustration. But you know what I mean? So Mr. Lowndes being the one person that may represent high school principals here to some extent, I'll push it so that you hear it, right? You don't have to respond to it, because I know that's not why you're here. But this is something we got to deal with, because just having seen 7 years of these, what I'm starting to see is there's some patterns with people. Folks don't account for checks in the appropriate ways. Folks don't account for who's the sponsor of X activities, field trips, over and over again. For similar kind of things. Ticket sales. I mean, they're just certain things. And so where then do we go in terms of how do we impress upon the principals that this is important, and then those who supervise the principals impress upon them that this is important, and then the principals impress upon whoever's responsible for these areas that this is important. And you know what? You gonna pay if you can't get this right, because it's just we are good at a lot of things that we do, but there has to be some level of accountability when folks can't seem to get the same thing right over and over again. So I appreciate what your team does. In some ways, you have to be very dispassionate about it, right? Because you just look at, are you following the procedures as they've been laid out or not? You either are or you're not. But on the other hand, if the principals are responsible and they're the ones that get the report and they feel the heat of this, right? Somebody's got to be saying to them, you need to get your staff together. Okay, so Mr. Lowndes, here this is. That's a message that needs to go back to folks that supervise principals. Mr. Bowers, you and I have had this conversation. This committee has dealt with this for quite some time. But I think what I'm hearing from Mr. Kaufman, and I think I have agreement from Mr. Durso, is that there's just concern that as we continue to do this training, as we continue to look at this, that we start to see some improvement, and that it get down to the level of the folks who ultimately are responsible, because these are parents' dollars that we're giving up, and I want my children, now that they're all graduated, but I've always wanted my children to have a great experience. So I don't have a big issue with the fees necessarily, but I want to know that if I'm giving you $50, that it's being accounted for appropriately, and that it goes for whatever I've given you the $50 for. Nobody, I don't think, is saying in here it hasn't gone for the right thing, but it should be accounted for so that we know that we don't have folks potentially doing the wrong thing with dollars that we're giving. So
Right, I think what I just heard you say, there's a difference between managing a process versus mismanagement of dollars.
Yes,
And what
very
I'm,
much so.
and what you're saying is, you're not, I mean.
I'm not accusing anybody of
mismanagement of
the
dollars, it's the process of accounting for
Right
them,
now,
and I
that's
think,
the issue.
I think that's a
Otherwise,
real.
let me just say, I mean,
Okay.
again, this committee has been concerned about this, we have made tremendous strides.
No, and I don't want to ignore that. The fact that we've got the software now so that it's
Well, more than
common.
that, we put together a manual, a financial manual for all of our managers, and it's a tremendous, a lot of the processes are outlined in that, and there's a lot of other documents that we've outlined, there about tickets and all of that, we have clear processes we put in place, so, and then we've
Train
done
budgets.
a tremendous amount of training for our staff, again, all result of conversations that have come out of this fiscal management committee. And then the audits, following up to make sure that there are, that we're reviewing everything that's going on, and then the follow-up to the audit is even more important, and that is that steps are being taken, plans are being put in place to make sure that these things aren't repeated. And so, again, I just want to say, we really have made, and working with the fiscal management, we made tremendous strides in terms of the fiscal management of the student funds.
I am in complete agreement. I think the issue that I've got here, and I believe this is what Mr. Kaufman was getting to, was that even with all of that work, and again, this is year 7 for me on this committee. Mr. Kaufman has been on since he's been on the board, and that's what, 5? Okay, 5 years. That even with that, if we were to go back to this annual report and read the annual report, one of the things that we see is that there are common themes. And given those common themes, I just think that we've got to figure out in the larger group, not just here, because again, it is not directed at the work that Mr. Pisha is doing and your team is doing, but just simply the findings that you have found in looking at the big picture. They're very similar. And so how do we start to address it more at what we deal with? How do we deal with a root cause analysis here? And how do we start to get to what do we need to do? That doesn't mean that that again, somebody has mismanaged the funds, but even with all the work we're doing, we still see, and hopefully we'll, with the new software, as you've said, getting our principals out of the business of being cashiers, help or our teachers, right? More and more allowing this to get to just the process that needs to go through, and much of that being automated. Hopefully we will see a significant difference, but we're still at the beginnings of that. And I think that our principals and our ultimately our teachers and the staff in the schools who ultimately touch these dollars need to understand the importance of this, okay? Because the public is looking at it and folks have real concerns, and ultimately the principal is the only name that gets on that report, They don't go to Mr. So-and-so was the sponsor of X club who repeatedly didn't. No, it's the principal who you write the report to. And so I raised that because I just think that we've been in this place, off the box.
Need to move on.
With our operational reports, we looked at payroll operations and Medicaid operations. We're going to concentrate going forward on payroll audits, the schools where the principal did not attend the payroll training, and make those our priority. With the Medicaid
So
operations,
just out of curiosity, principals, what percentage of principals didn't attend the payroll training?
10%. 90% did.
with the Medicaid operations, the special education staff who processes this do an outstanding job. It's primarily manual, and they would benefit from an automated system, but that's already, in the plan. It's on the drawing board. It's just waiting for funding to go forward. We constantly are providing assistance to managers and staff, as was mentioned. The financial manual. There's chapter 20 is the IF area, and Sue is the one who gathers these together. Every year we update each chapter, and Mr. Bowers reviews them before they go to the print shop for final update. We get emails and phone calls every day from principals and financial agents, which we're happy to respond to. If it's a question that's in the financial manual, I will go to whatever chapter it is, copy and paste it in my response to the person, just to let them know that they could look that up themselves and to help educate them where to go in the future. Every year at the end of last weekend in April, I do a fiscal inventory observation of all 5 transportation depots. They provide that information to our external auditors to let them know that we are reviewing that it's a massive amount of inventory that the transportation depots have. The IF software conversion, we'd started November in 2012 and had planned to have it completed by this month, but due to the overwhelming enthusiasm of those people who'd converted initially, Sue ramped up the conversion, and we got them all on board by May. So the end-of-year reports came off of the SFO software. However, I had to manually add that into this massive spreadsheet for the EPS, secondary schools, and the Quicken software for elementaries. So hopefully next year it will go a little quicker. And again, we've done the training for a number of years now, but there's a core team who is supposed to be taking over this school year, but we've volunteered to sit in on the training as this new team gets up to speed in case they have any questions from the audience. We've done some investigations over the years which are in the report, and in addition to separate investigations, we've gotten some hotline reports, and a number of those in the fraud area concern non-payment of tuition, where the caller alleged that there were non-MCPS residents attending MCPS schools. We found out that 3 of those 5 were valid reports and students were withdrawn, but other 2 were just a misunderstanding. The number of reports we got from our hotline dropped in half from what we received the first 2 years. So, but
Curious, you ever get a report that someone's attending the wrong school in the wrong cluster?
in fact, yes, we did get one of those. And the caller heard this from the mother who was relaying this information, and the other person knew that those kids actually should be going to their home school, but they were being transported by the mother to a different school because she wanted them to go there. Well, that got straightened out, and those kids are now attending their proper school. And recommendations were the standard ones that have been there in the past. I feel no pressure for not being independent or going anywhere that we want to go to look at. So that is a technical issue by internal audit standards, but it's not an issue as far as operationally being able to work independently. And with the number of personnel, if we just looked at the number of schools that we've increased since 1990, we would be looking at 1 additional FTE, but again, when we're looking at an operational budget where everybody is looking to have to cut back, I certainly wouldn't be pressing that issue. And again, the comment is, whenever we get to the point where we're back in a good revenue projection, I would bring that forward. And that's the conclusion of the auditor's report.
Just going back, one point, I think you said 77 schools were audited this year.
Correct.
Refresh my memory, what's the time frame and how frequent school audits take place?
Our goal is to get to every high school annually. Middle school's 18 months, elementary every 3 years. But when we have a new principal, we try to get out there within the first year of that new principalship. So this coming year, there's the most new principals since I've been doing this. And that always bumps our schedule back. So it's our goal, but we aren't making it 100% based on what the schools are, but we do the best we can with the staffing and the resources we have.
So is the turnover the issue or just sheer volume of 202 schools?
I would say both are a factor. But what I'm hoping to do is with the new software to possibly look at more system-wide things and possibly red flags, so maybe, rework how we look at schools, and if I come up with any ideas, possibly broach that with the Fiscal Management Committee. If these are our goals, every so often, with different levels of schools, maybe there could be a different approach.
And going back to some of Mr. Barkley's concerns, have you or your team ever been invited or participated in like any of the monthly principals meetings? Or even been invited?
What do you mean by the monthly principals meeting?
Principals
Yes, the
meetings.
answer is no.
You talking about that
What meeting for anyone?
No, they meet as groups.
That's association.
The principals groups, the middle school groups,
Well,
etc.
you mean like with the A&S, and then they have their meeting?
No, they meet among themselves. Like, I don't know, help me out, Mr. Lowndes, if the high school principals used to meet on the first Wednesday
Still.
or whatever. And sounds like you have not had the opportunity.
I have made presentations to groups of principals, but not
Okay.
to what you're referring to.
Yeah, I would guess, just to editorialize a bit, not to belabor this issue, we spent a lot of time on it, is perhaps the sense of urgency of these issues is not always felt at the local level. There are so many priorities for a school principal and for a faculty. And I don't want to say this is unimportant, because it certainly is important, but I don't know if that message has always been conveyed.
Now we'll look at the data report.
As has been mentioned, the IAF funds, unless mentioned specifically otherwise, belong to the student body currently enrolled in school. The IAFs are deposited into the checking account, and from there, any excess funds may be transferred to a centralized investment fund at the discretion of the principal. Effective April 1st, 2011, MCPS began a partnership with Sandy Spring Bank that Sue coordinated. And we now have just our investments in Sandy Spring Bank. We used to have them spread across different negotiable type of instruments through the county. But the CIF rate of interest as of June 30th was 24 basis points, which sounds a lot better than 0.24%. And that was the same rate as it was last year, so it hasn't improved. Schools generated $33.8 million in revenues while expending $34 million in disbursements. The high schools maintained approximately 53% of all the IAF assets, while the middle schools 21% and elementary 24%. As you know, we regularly review the compliance with MCPS policies, regulations, procedures, and issue a report afterwards. But an IAF audit, as it says in our reports, does not review every single transaction or school activity, but seeks to provide reasonable assurance that there's compliance with policies, regulations, and procedures. So we pick a sample of different items, and there could be something that might not be going right, but it didn't show up in the sample, so we didn't have a finding in a particular area. Or it could be the luck of the principal that everything in the sample that we looked at had some little thing wrong with it, whereas if we looked at the other 90%, there wouldn't have been a problem of that particular item. We also have a table of the data, and that's followed by the different graphs that go along with that. I got noted from one of our former principals, who's now an associate superintendent, and he happened to have been from Walter Johnson, and he didn't think the data in this table looked right, and he was correct. What had happened was
Walter Johnson out of, it's not alphabetical or whatever.
Right, that particular associate superintendent used to be the principal there, but what had happened was with school funds online, they list the schools differently. Like the first school in the drop-down is Loiteman Middle School because it's A. Loiteman. And if I were going to look for King Middle School, I need to look under D for Dr. King to find that school. So the bottom line is the graphs are correct because that data was pulling from the original source data. The table was copied and pasted into that, but in the table, Walter Johnson had been moved under Gaithersburg for Johnson, so that kind of mucked up the school by school. But the table, the bar graphs are correct. So here is that table where it got properly aligned. And I'll be sending that
We'll need to
back to you.
republish it, because this is, on the web right now.
I'll be sending that up to you, Becky, electronically.
I'm curious, I know in the report, just on the first page, you talk about PTA giving and booster clubs, but do we track anything with regards to foundations? Is there another source of revenue, I guess, that are giving to our schools?
Well,
And I know you've got the reference to PTA, I'm not sure what.
we aren't authorized to go in and look at the individual school foundations, but any money that is given from a foundation or a PTA or a booster club that goes into the IAF at that point in time, we will track it. If ever there's an issue, we can ask PTA for records, which we have done and received to verify that, yes, in fact, everything looks okay, it's just somebody thought something otherwise.
I just like you mentioned PTAs and booster clubs, I think that foundations are another source of, another group that contributes to schools. To what extent I guess on page 3, and just for my own education, when we talk about disbursements that we use, the IF4 talks about maintenance of buildings. We can use IA funds for building maintenance. Can you clarify?
Well, a good example is that based on usage, schools receive money from the ICB, and and the primary use of those funds is for maintenance type projects. It's really to give schools money to address the wear and tear of the building. And so there's some categories that they put out for schools to use of how those dollars are supposed to be spent. So that would be an example of how they might use money for maintenance of buildings.
And every year, schools are required to report to ICB how they spent that money the prior school year.
Well, I mean, would that be like if a booster club gave money to maintain the field or the field to the school and all that, so that would be, so that's how the money flow would be for, so the booster club wants to say, okay, here's $30,000 for maintaining the football field maintenance. It goes into the IAF and then that's how it gets dispersed.
Yes. That's the intent. Sometimes boosters clubs are free agents, and the board members know about some of those that we've been dealing with. So.
I guess getting back to, the earlier point we're talking about in terms of some of these amounts, and I guess in terms of admission receipts and all that. I'd be interested in a conversation as to whether or not there's any opportunity for even, like I look at a school like Edison that has hardly anything, and I know that they were, remember, we were there last year and they were looking to, they had kids that were, there were kids that were going to their,
Skills USA.
Skills USA, and they didn't have any, an issue to fundraise or whatever to pay for the kids, and they have very limited IAF accounts. So I guess the question is whether or not we can create a vehicle for some sharing, of some of these accounts, whether or not these accounts, they're for the benefits of students, but does it have to be the students at that school, or whether or not we could,
We don't have to, and we certainly have worked with schools to partner to request for them to support other schools, and that some of that has been going on. So it's not unusual. I know the board has a broader interest in more discussions in the take place.
And is there any goal or look at Sherwood with an ending cash balance of $750,000? Is there any?
Their rock and roll revival makes
They're
them a lot of
rocking
money.
it, but they keep that same balance. Should there be any obligation for them to put that money back into the, at some point in time, for a fund balance, how much should a fund
There are
balance?
pieces that are spendable and pieces that are restricted to the purpose. If it's a student memorial account, it can only be used for that purpose.
Because some of that money belongs to somebody, account by account by account. And as Sue mentioned, we have one high school who has maybe about $250,000, but that's in a restricted memorial fund that can only be spent, the interest of it.
But I think you do review that with them.
But if some of the receipts are just athletic receipts, you may have revenue that's not necessarily in
Right.
restricted accounts.
Well, with athletics, you get into Title IX and equity issues with that too. So there are a lot of things to consider.
I don't know, I think I'd like a more fuller discussion at some point on,
Right.
whether or not these monies can be, and to what extent we can look at possible use of these funds for student purposes.
Non-restricted funds, 'cause
Non-restricted,
that's- that I think is key
non-restricted
to this.
funds, and I think that may be something,
That would
even
be
with the
very-
policy committee with as they look at CNA, something that we could have a conversation with them about. Okay.